What is up, everybody? We're here. This is the Sharp Angles podcast, the Thursday morning edition of the Sharp Angles podcast, which we do every Thursday at 11:30 a.m. Eastern over on YouTube. Go to YouTube, search Sharp Football Analysis, click subscribe, get notified whenever we go live throughout the entire football season, which we do a lot with myself and Tucker, with Warren on Tuesdays and Fridays, and then of course with on Thursday mornings with the one, the only Rich Hribar. How you doing, Rich?
What's good, brother? Yeah, let's hear, man. Week 11, making moves. The slate looks fun. There's a lot of real good football games this week. We could roll into 1 p.m. Steelers Ravens. We go into our Chiefs Bills rivalry at 4. And then the Sunday night game, which was flexed, right? We got
Yeah.
Bengals Chargers at nighttime, and that all of the Bengals primetime games have been awesome this year. So hopefully that continues on Sunday night.
Yeah, no, it's funny you mentioned the three games we're actually going to talk about because you're right. It is
Yeah,
just a fun it's just a fun three games here. And then we've got some other kind of interesting subplots to get to as well with, Anthony Richardson is back. The Bears have changed offensive coordinator, right? Like we have a lot of interesting things. I think that Seahawks and 49ers game is maybe more interesting, like because of the other games. I haven't heard as much about that game, but I think that game is pretty interesting and maybe could be, pretty high scoring. And so yeah, there's lots of stuff going on. And then of course we have Jacksonville at Detroit, which might just be it might just be Detroit running the ball 60 times. And so yeah, so they can't all be winners. But yeah, no, I think it's gonna be a
We have
really
a
good
low
week.
bar to clear from last week, so
Last week was not. I had expressed, in fact, I talked last week about how I wasn't too excited about the weekend, and I thought that it was just because we were going to have to wake up early to watch Giants Panthers, but that game ended up being awesome. Like I hope you woke up early to watch that game. It wasn't well played, and both teams were actively trying to lose throughout the entire fourth quarter and overtime, but it was fun. I had a great time watching that game. I wish that the rest of the games had kind of followed suit in that way. But this is definitely a good week to have a good week of NFL action because this is our annual Sharp Football Analysis free week. And what that means is you can get access to all of our premium content, to Warren Sharp's betting recommendations, which have been doing amazing. A $100 better is up $9,794 this year following Warren Sharp's NFL betting recommendations. So he's been doing great on that. You can get those for free this week. You get access to all of Rich Hribar's fantasy content for free this week, his worksheet previews, previewing every single game, every single player, every single week as his worksheets. You also have his rankings. You have his DFS picks, which come out a little bit later in the week. All of that available for free this week as part of Free Week. Head over to Sharp Football Analysis, sign up for Free Week. Head over to sharp.football. You get a link directly to it. All of that is available to you. Go and check that out. There's a QR code on the screen, by the way, if you're watching this on YouTube. There's a QR code on the screen. You just click that, it'll take you right to it. Take advantage of this offer, take advantage of Free Week, get access to all of this content that we've been doing for the entire season. And make sure you're getting involved in it here. And we're going to keep doing it, by the way, into the playoffs. We keep going all the way through the Super Bowl. All of this will be going. Rich will be writing his worksheet previews for every single game in the playoffs. I hope he was still planning to do that, and I didn't just force him to do that.
no,
But
no, no, we
I
always do.
think I think that was the plan. And so yeah, so lots of stuff as part of that. So make sure
First
make sure you check that
weekend
out.
of fantasy playoffs is a great DFS slate too. It's always
Oh,
fun.
it's I think I so we have Thanksgiving coming up in a couple weeks, and I love the Thanksgiving DFS slate. I'll probably write something for the website actually about the Thanksgiving DFS slate. It's one of my favorite of the year for sure. And I know a lot of people feel the same way. I know I'm not an indie
How else
DFS
can we
player.
ignore our families?
That's
What
correct.
other?
I will be smoking a turkey, and so that will be my excuse to be outside in front of my patio TV watching watching all of these games and hoping for the best. But I think my other favorite DFS slate of the year is that first weekend, that wild card weekend. It's just what there's 6 games. Like it's just really fun. They
Well, it's like
oftentimes
two
they break them
Thanksgiving
up.
slates. It's like two.
Exactly, they break them
Yeah.
up to Saturday and Sunday. Yeah, like I just have yeah, no, you're right. That weekend is fun. In fact, maybe I'll write some DFS stuff for
Yeah.
that
Do
weekend
more
as well.
work.
I'll steal your thunder. I'll steal your thunder on that one. All right, let's get into it. And like I said, there are lots of interesting kind of storylines here. And I think we have to start with Anthony Richardson, which on Monday I believe Shane Steichen came out. I just saw the news flash and went, okay, this is weird. This makes sense. Or this doesn't make sense that they're sticking with Joe Flacco, but I guess that, that's what they're going to do. And then we were at a meeting yesterday, and all of a sudden Anthony Richardson was going to start on this week in week 11. And so I guess the question is, if we're playing real or fake, which we just saw the graphic on the screen. Thank you, producer Matt. If we're playing real or fake, the real or fake is Anthony Richardson worth starting this week? Or maybe even the better question is, how many usable weeks are we going to get out of Anthony Richardson the rest of the way, assuming he stays healthy, assuming they don't change starters again? What's kind of your confidence level in Richardson kind of moving forward from a fantasy perspective?
Yeah, this is a tricky situation, right? Because I think a lot of people from the outside looking in kind of question just why play Flacco, right? Like, just ride this thing out with Richardson, let him develop. He's a guy that's only has 11 starts, in the NFL. Like, let him develop. The reason you took him was based on athletic traits first, and then you were hoping that was going to blossom into, something that we saw, Josh Allen manifest into. But that always was going to take time, so that always felt weird. But from a fantasy gaming stance, even as bad as Flacco was, we kind of wanted him to be the quarterback for the pass catchers. So it was kind of like, what do we do? What do we do situation. For Richardson himself, he's kind of like a volatile QB2. Like, we know he has upside, but also he's been the QB 22 or lower in every game since week 1 that he started. The Jets have been a little bit more vulnerable if you are playing him this weekend, especially since the firing of Robert Saleh. They do have really good splits at home over that span still, so we can see what happens. But they've been really bad against mobile quarterbacks kind of the whole year. They're 30th in rushing points allowed per game to quarterbacks. That would be an avenue to kind of have, Richardson, to the best of his abilities to produce fantasy points. But when you look at the remainder of the Colts schedule, I mean, how many more spots are we going to be happy? This team still has their bye too in week 14, but they play the Lions next week, who haven't allowed multiple touchdowns to any quarterback. You get a favorable spot maybe at New England, then they come out of the bye and they play at Denver the first week of the fantasy playoffs. The Titans have been a good defense, and you get maybe a favorable match from the fantasy championship against the Giants. So I think 2 QB super flex league, like, you pick your spots, maybe just play for upside. If you were playing like vagabonds, like low ceiling guys, like you've just been throwing out dudes at QB2, he maybe offers a little more upside than that, but we really haven't seen it since week 1. And then from the wide receiver stance, I mean, we were really transitioning to Josh Downs being like a wide receiver 2 with upside. And the last time we did see him play with Anthony Richardson, he caught a 70-yard touchdown. So maybe we still run into some of those big plays, but there definitely is volatility here. He has been outside of the top 50 scores in 2 of the 3 games that he's played with Anthony Richardson. And then the other ancillary guys that we maybe have been able to get excited for with Flacco, like A.D. Mitchell, Michael Pittman coming back, Alec Pierce, like these guys are kind of just largely left for dead.
Yeah, I mean, I had Alex Pierce heading into like the first kind of edition of the waiver wire. I had him as my number 1 receiver ad because of a lot of the promising stuff we saw last week and the uncertainty around Michael Pittman. I mean, Alex Pierce had his highest route participation of the year last week without Michael Pittman, and he saw those 7 targets that tied for his most of the year. And so you thought, okay, what are we going to see from Michael Pittman? With his back and finger injury, is he going to be out for a while? Are we going to continue to get Joe Flacco as it looked on Monday? And then all of that just kind of fell apart. Michael Pittman is, he practiced, I believe, in full on
Mm-hmm.
Wednesday, and Anthony Richardson is back, and you're just, there it goes. And I don't even think this is more like Joe Flacco wasn't good. And so I don't think this is even as much of like quality of targets thing. I think the quality of targets from Joe Flacco were probably better, but we were just getting more passing volume that we were getting with
Right.
Richardson. And so if we assume that that is going to continue and that we're going to continue to see Richardson, not have a ton of passing volume, then yeah, that hurts all of the receivers down the board. Downs, Pittman, who just hasn't been healthy all year, hasn't really had it all year if he's not, scoring random touchdowns. Pierce, and then like you said, if Pittman's back and Richardson's there, A.D. Mitchell should be on the wire in redraft leagues. Like that's where we are. And so it's just kind of, yeah, I think it is kind of disappointing from like that perspective. From Richardson's own fantasy perspective, I think the important point here is that he was already getting the rushing, like 40 to 50 rushing yards, and it still wasn't working for fantasy. You could take that one of 2 ways. You could say, all right, well, that means that we can't use this guy. But you could also take it to the way of, what if he hits on, I mentioned it in that game before he before he, was benched,
The Houston
he
game,
had
yeah.
like 2 or 3 long plays that if he hits on those, his fantasy day looks a lot better, and you still have those, 5 to 6 rushing points that he's been pretty consistently getting. So, and that was really the thing when week 1, right? With Alex Pierce and on some deep plays. And so I still think that is there for him. I still think in DFS I'm going to be very interested in certain spots. As you mentioned, the schedule's not great. I think this week against the Jets is pretty good spot. But yeah, it's not as good. I actually got a question when I was talking about Anthony Richardson on social media. I got a question from a bunch of people. It seems like this is something that a lot of people are dealing with, and that is Drake May or Anthony Richardson this week. And it was a tough question for me to answer. Where do you stand on that one, do you think?
I'm team Drake May there. Just I think the floor has been better, and we're not scared of the matchup against the Rams. I mean, we're scared of the Rams getting pressure, but they still give up a lot of big plays. So I think if you're just hunting for like the outcome, the apex outcome for Anthony Richardson, right? That's fine. But like if you're just playing, say like I do need floor, I would start with May. And go from there. Yeah, the crazy thing about Richardson and the benching of it all together was that when you watch Richardson, and I'm no QB scout, right? But like Richardson looks the part. Like he's making the right decisions. He hangs in pockets. He does everything up until releasing the football well, and then you just don't know where it's going after that. But that's kind of the weird thing is like he does look the part
Uh,
until the
a
ball comes
real
out.
a real other than that situation.
Yeah,
But
real
other than
other than
that,
that. But other than that,
yeah.
but I mean, but when you look at when Flacco took over, though, the negative plays just started to mount because like Richardson, what you did is you traded like a higher completion rate and like maybe a little bit of a higher success rate, but then you just compiled that and traded that off with more sacks, and Flacco had more turnover worthy plays than Richardson. So like you kind of got your hand in both jars.
Yeah, and you're also not getting like the rushing upside. It never really made a ton of sense.
Right. And
But
if
I
you look
mean,
at Jonathan Taylor splits, like the running game has been better with Anthony Richardson than Flacco, which inherently makes sense as well.
yeah, we talked about that last week. I think it was last week, where like that's a real thing for him. And so you're going to expect. I'm glad you mentioned that because I didn't even have him on my notes of things to talk about. But you would expect better for Jonathan Taylor as well, which so that's certainly a nice thing. Let's transition into another young quarterback who is struggling, and that is Caleb Williams. And so I guess the real or fake question is that we're going to see better from Caleb Williams with the offensive coordinator change in Chicago.
Maybe. I mean, he's had 2 good games and they were in spots that were like really identifiable to be good games. And so that makes it tricky. You still like the talent. The offensive line, though, is still just like a major issue. Like that's just a major hurdle we have to get over. You look at these games that they come out of the bye. They allowed a 63% pressure rate to Washington, who's been getting a lot of pressure, but they were 13th in the NFL in pressure rate coming into that game. Then you're like, all right, they play the Cardinals the week after, they were 30th in pressure coming into that match against the Bears. And they got pressure on 42% of Caleb Williams dropbacks that game. Then you're like, all right, Jesus. Like last week, I kind of was mixing in matches. Like, New England's not getting any pressure either. Like maybe there's a shot for these guys, these Bears guys to be cheap. New England was 29th in pressure rate. They pressured him on 39% of his dropbacks, sacked him 9 times. Like they just can't pass protect right now. And Caleb's out there running for his life, buying times. If you look at like things like open score, like separate, like their receivers aren't getting open. It's like a fundamental top-down disaster here. So it's hard to really believe in like kind of the outcome here where like we're expecting him to be like a usable fantasy piece outside of just being run into some QB2 streaming weeks. But I think the days of like kind of expecting him to be like a 1 QB streamer have kind of been mushed because this was the pocket that was good for Caleb Williams. This was the stretch of the Bears schedule. We've been talking about it with DeAndre Swift, right? Like DeAndre Swift is a guy we've been talking about trading because once this week expires, they have a 6-week run where they play the Lions twice, the Vikings twice, the 49ers. Like it's a disaster after this. So when you look at that schedule for the Bears, I mean, I don't really see how you're excited about anything.
Yeah, I mean, it's tough. What really worries me is this starting to look a lot just like Justin Fields and what was going on with him. Because actually, if you look at the offensive line, like the metrics that try to isolate the offensive line play, the Bears are 14th in pass block win rate. I don't really believe that. I think just by watching the games, they seem worse than that. But over the last 3 games that you mentioned, with all of this pressure, the Bears have had a 46.3% pressure rate allowed since their bye over the last 3 games. Over that span, 31.6% of those pressures have turned into sacks of Caleb Williams, which is the second worst in the league.
College
And
problem too.
again, Yeah, exactly. That's not a surprise based on what we saw in college, and so like it's this continuing thing. But what I always go back to is you mentioned it was like those two performances before the bye because it really seemed like things had kind of turned around. I guess maybe even three before the bye, but definitely those two performances before the bye seemed like things had turned around. You said, well, those were very identifiable spots, but then like I think you glossed over a little bit. The Commanders, Cardinals, and Patriots were also identifiable spots,
That's what I said.
and it
Yeah.
didn't work. Yeah, exactly. It didn't work. And so like I don't know what, I don't know what to do with that information. So it's just, it's really a tough spot. And then they're changing to Thomas Brown. And I mean, we don't have a long history with Brown, obviously, but things didn't go well with a young quarterback who was struggling last year with him with the Panthers. And so you're like, you kind of throw your hands up. And I think your answer of I don't know is probably the right answer. Like
Yeah, I just look
it's
at
gonna
their
be tough to
schedule
tell.
and that's what I say, like, how am I supposed to have confidence in this offense when I don't wanna play guys against the Lions and Vikings pretty regular quarterbacks, right? Like, I don't wanna play those guys. I don't wanna play good quarterbacks against those guys.
Yeah, it's a really tough situation. Actually, kind of to this point, we have a question here in the chat from Daniel. I got offered DeAndre Swift for Joe Mixon. Yes, turned that down. He said nearly choked, but he also threw out like
I mean,
Mixon and
I salute
CD.
that Swift gamer.
Yeah,
Salute
good for
you.
Swift. Hey, you miss 100% of the shots you don't take.
That's
Just
right.
shoot or shoot, baby. So get out there and do it. But what about Mixon and CD for AJ Brown, Terry McLaurin, and Swift make more sense? Like I'm interested in your answer here because I'm in a bit of a pickle because I don't want to be in the DeAndre Swift business and I also don't want to be in the CD Lamb business. And so I'm kind of I'm kind of at a loss here.
Yeah, that one's tough. He does have the rest of his running back roster there. So basically, he'd be having to start James Conner and then I assume one of Tony Pollard or Nick Chubb every week. Oh, and DeAndre Swift the rest of those weeks. So you have the kind of to swap one of those guys. I would say AJ Brown and Terry McLaurin and Nico Collins is kind of exciting to start as your three wide receivers, though. So that is exciting. If you believe in Pollard and Chubb, I have questions about, with Tajay Spears coming back, what we're going to see out of Tony Pollard. Literally the entire season, Brian Callahan has talked about they wanted these guys to be interchangeable, was the word in the offseason. Then early on in the season, Tajay Spears got nicked up. And before he had the hamstring injury, he got nicked up before that, and they gave Pollard a workload. And all throughout that period, Brian Callahan ad nauseum said, like, I still want to play Tajay Spears more. I want to play him more. He just hasn't been able to. And last week he comes out fully healthy out of the hamstring, and we see him get his largest workload, and Pollard kind of go back to being like a 2/3 of the backfield touch guy. So that makes him more, and because it's a bad offense. So this makes Tony Pollard now, if he's only get 60% of the backfield touches and not be a complete volume-based play because the offense is bad, now he's got to start scoring touchdowns if his overall touches take a little bit of a hit. So that makes him kind of a risky start every week, right? You're doing the whack-a-mole game. Is this a week that he does score a touchdown? And then it's gonna be frustrating because there's going to be spots where you're like, it's not a good matchup, and then he gets the 1 yard touchdown, and then you're just constantly chasing. I am excited for Nick Chubb this week. The rest of the season schedule for the Browns is not good, but I like to if you can get by and you think that I can rotate and make water out of a wine out of like picking the matchups between Swift, Chubb, and Pollard, starting those three wide receivers is alluring.
Yeah, I mean it's tough. I like that's a very close trade. I think I might rather just keep Mixon because Mixon's been so good and having that currency of a running back that's getting the workload that he's getting. I think I would rather just keep that. But yeah, it's close. Like that's the answer. And I would get if I was you, I'd go with whatever Rich thinks. That's the way forward for sure. I'm glad you brought up the Pollard in Spears thing. We have another question here. Well, do you think it's a bad move to trade Pollard for Charbonnet and Cam Akers? He has Walker
Yes.
and Aaron Jones, and so he'd be getting what we assume are the two handcuffs. I will say Charbonnet is definitely the handcuff for Walker. The Cam Akers stuff and the Ty Chandler stuff in the fourth quarter after Aaron Jones left and then obviously came back. Ty Chandler actually outsnapped Cam Akers in the fourth quarter and had just one fewer touch. So while I went into that game pretty sure that Cam Akers was the handcuff, I am no longer sure about that. Either way, I think you probably would still rather have Pollard rather than just gambling on handcuffs because we know what Pollard is. And to your point about the Spears and Pollard thing, it's kind of a difficult situation because you also can't get excited about Spears that much because you don't know what the
Right.
usage is going to be week to week, and he's not going to get those red zone usage. At least we would assume he's not going to get those red zone usage, and so like that makes it tough for him. I think he's played 3 snaps in the red zone all season. Obviously, he missed some games, but like we think that's going to be Tony Pollard, so it's a tough. And then one more question here: trade Tank Dell for CD Lamb. Oh man, have fun, Rich. I don't know. I will say
I
this
still
is
would.
that
I would take I would take on the risk there because I mean Dell is so volatile already, and you got Nico
yeah.
Collins coming back. And as bad as it was for CeeDee Lamb, I mean he could have had a touchdown if he could if Jerry's World didn't had some didn't have the blotting sun, and he still had double-digit targets. Like he's had double-digit
Yeah.
targets every game for the past month. So I mean he's a good player, and we don't have to completely throw the baby out of the bathwater with the Cooper Rush game last week as much as it was terrible. I think he was the first quarterback since 2001 to have that many passes in that few yards, and it was a Cowboys quarterback in 2001. It was Anthony Wright. That was last game. But we also had a sample just 2 years ago where Lamb was good with Cooper Rush, or good enough. Like so, I would still make that. I would still do that
Yeah, I think I would too,
until
just
Trey
based on
Lance
kind of the
does.
splits we know, with all of that. I did want to talk about Trey Lance here. I like I guess the real or fake is, will Trey Lance be fantasy relevant at some point this season? Can he be our poor man's or maybe just like normal middle income man's uh uh Anthony Richardson? Like could that be what he could be for us if he ends up starting? Like is that what we're looking at maybe?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, a guy that can run around, like if he's good, if they're not going to jerk him around and he's not going to be like a package player where like both guys are playing and he actually is just in the game and they're just going to ride out and let him throw interceptions if he's going to throw interceptions, then he can still run into points. I mean, there's a couple spots, you got Giants on the schedule, you've got Commanders, you got Bengals, the Panthers in week 15, which is the start of the fantasy playoffs in a two
I was
QB
looking
league.
at it.
You
I
got the
was staring at it. Yeah.
Buccaneers, So like for a mobile quarterback, like absolutely. And a lot of those teams have been giving up a lot of rushing points to quarterbacks. I mean, you look at the Bengals and the Buccaneers specifically, those are teams that have given up a lot of points on the ground to quarterbacks.
Yeah, no, I'm I think that he's definitely would be a 2 quarterback guy if we get the starter like designation. But I do worry that it would be, kind of just a package player or something like that. But also like what are the Cowboys doing starting Trey Lance is going to leave. They're going to spend a 4th-round pick on Trey Lance. He's just not going to be there anymore, having not really done anything. I did want to mention this. I actually went and looked for it. I wanted to make sure I tweeted this earlier, but I wanted to make sure I got it right. CD Lamb was targeted on 37% of his routes and caught 60% of those targets, but still averaged 0.78 yards per route run. I did not know
Impressive.
that was possible. I did not know that that was actually something statistically that could happen. That is what we were talking about last week. He had a 60% catch rate. It's not like he was, not catching the passes. He just no yards, 0 yards. Philadelphia's defense is good. It probably will be better. Yeah. Take Lamb. Maybe that's fine. All right, one more here for real or fake. And I guess the real or fake is that Sam Darnold has turned into a pumpkin. He's back to being Sam Darnold. We all got fooled again, just like in his four game run with the Panthers that one time. And now we're back to Sam Darnold kind of being Sam Darnold. Is that real or fake?
Well, he's always been Sam Darnold. I mean, look at the box scores. Like he's still been taking a ton of sacks, even in the
He's
good
always
runs.
he's always Sam Darnold to me, is what
Yeah.
Rich said.
Well, I mean, he's been like, this isn't a
Yeah.
new development. Like he's thrown an interception in every game but 2. He's been one of the highest sack takers in the NFL this entire season. I still think when you look at him, especially when you think of the alternatives Minnesota has, he's still fine. Like last week was only the second time he was in the back half of weekly scoring for quarterbacks. Like it's like what you out of a QB2, he still had a relatively high floor. Are you pissed off that he left a match against the Jaguars on the table? Like absolutely. Like we had a lot more expectations, right? But he's had 2 bad games the entire season, and he's still like, you look at his yards per pass attempt. He just is coming out the previous 3 games. He threw for 8.5 yards per pass attempt or higher at the previous 3 games. So I still think he's a fine QB2.
Yeah, I think it's probably okay. I think if you thought that the touchdown rate he had over the first 4 weeks of the season was just going to continue, it was 10.4%, which is just wild. That's not a touchdown rate that people
Now, if
have
you're a real
in the
Vikings
NFL.
fan, you're probably a little worried, but for us,
Eh, it's probably fine. I think the one thing is that you mentioned like this kind of like, I don't want to say down run, but this like not as good as the first 4 weeks run came against the first three was against the pre-collapse Jets, the Lions, and the Rams. So like the Rams get pressure, the Lions I think are pretty good, and so like you say it, but like to go 3 touchdowns and 5 interceptions against the Colts and the Jaguars is just that's red flag, man. That's red flag. But we'll see where we go. All right, let's get to some of these game previews. Before we do that, though, I do want to bring back up that we have our annual free week this week over at Sharp Football Analysis. This is the week that you can get access to all of our premium content. Warren Sharp's betting recommendations, which again have been doing great this year. A $100 better is up $9,794 for the season following our NFL betting recommendations. You get access to all of Rich Hribar's work, including his worksheet previews. He previews every single fantasy relevant game, a player in every single game, every single week. Those are his worksheet previews. They are worth the price of admission, especially since that price of admission this week is free. So make sure you go and check it out. Watching on YouTube, there's a QR code on the screen. You can scan that. You go to sharp.football. There's a link directly to that, sharpfootballanalysis.com. There's links to it throughout the site. Take advantage of this free week. Get access to those worksheets, Rich Hribar's rankings, Rich Hribar's Sunday weekly chats, in which he chats with our subscribers, only for our subscribers, answers your questions going into kickoff. That's at 11:45 a.m. Eastern every single Sunday morning. That link ends up getting emailed out to you and sent to you, and you can have access to that subscribers only chat. So much available for our subscribers. Make sure you check that out. One of the things that's available to subscribers, as I mentioned, are the game previews. And so we're going to flash a few of those on the screen as we're going through these. If you're watching on YouTube, so you can see all of the work that Rich does week to week. And it's a ton of work. And let's get started here with the Ravens at the Steelers. The Ravens -3, the total of 47.5. And this is an interesting game, just like that game a few weeks ago with the Ravens and the Broncos, which obviously they, came through with flying colors. This is an interesting game because it's pitting Lamar Jackson having, I mean, arguably his best season, especially as a passer, definitely his best season against a defense that first of all, is good, that we think it's good by itself, but also he has a checkered and somewhat surprisingly short history against the Steelers.
Yeah, the Steelers definitely. I mean, you look at last week. I mean, against Jaden Daniels. I mean, only a 50% completion rate, 5.9 yards per pass attempt allowed, and the big thing, they held him to 5 rushing yards. Right, like this. It was the first dud we kind of got from Daniels. I mean, Diami Brown didn't help us out with one bad drop in the end zone, but even with that touchdown, it was going to probably be his lowest scoring game of the season. The Steelers did lose Alex Highsmith in that game, which is a pretty big deal. They basically go from 5th in the NFL in pressure rate with Alex Highsmith on the field to 30th with him off the field. So we'll see if that is a big problem. I just also think too, this iteration of the Ravens, though, and a little bit we talked about going to that Broncos game, like they're built differently than previous versions, and we'll see if Deontay Johnson gets incorporated more. But when they made that trade for Deontay Johnson, I was like, well, the biggest winner is Lamar Jackson. We really haven't seen Deontay play a lot because, they're surrounding Lamar Jackson with just players that get open. And if you look at, like we talk about, like separation score stuff or ESPN's open score, they have 4 of the top 30 guys in those metrics. I mean, a lot of people would be surprised to hear Mark Andrews' names up there, but like Mark Andrews, the only problem with Mark Andrews this year has just been playing full time. Like anytime he's actually played snaps, he's been really good, actually, especially on a per target basis. He's just not playing, the amount of snaps that he's played in previous years, which we did get to see last week. But Isaiah Likely is going to play this week. He's already practiced, unfortunately. So we're back to living that touchdown life. But the Steelers, like if the Steelers are going to line up and play cover one and blitz Lamar Jackson, I do think the Ravens are more equipped to handle like that type of stuff. We saw that a little bit against the Broncos as well. They've got guys that can get open. Lamar's playing so good. I mean, he didn't even run in that Broncos game. He ran for 4 yards in that Broncos game and still had 24 fantasy points. I mean, I'm not gonna, waver this into this matchup because of that. Like he's been so damn good. He's been so good that other people are just trying to create other MVP narratives for other players. Like, that because he's been so far ahead of the pack that we've tried to create Jared Goff MVP narratives. Now Jalen Hurts is getting a little bit of a run. So it's like, man, Lamar's been so good. It's a bummer that like he kind of backdoored into it last year because I don't he just had a good year last year for Lamar Jackson standards. It wasn't even like an elite Lamar Jackson season, but they just gave it to the best quarterback on the best team. But like this year, he is clearly the best player in the NFL.
I tried to I think it was last week or something. I tried to throw some Jared Goff MVP narrative out, and you just immediately shut it down. Which you're right, like it's been Lamar Jackson. I think your point about this being a different team is good. I'll talk about Russell Wilson later. Russell Wilson's a guy that I like this week. That's not a contrarian opinion. A lot of people like Russell Wilson this week, but when I was talking about it on social media, I got some pushback, which I understand. I think is it's reasonable pushback that these Ravens Steelers games always just end 17-13, and why aren't we headed towards that? And I think but these teams know each other well, and I get all that, and it is a divisional kind of rivalry, and things happen in those kind of games, and so I think that I understand that kind of point of view. But like you said, this is a different Baltimore team, this is a different Baltimore offense, and perhaps more importantly, this is a different Baltimore defense, and that Baltimore
Yeah.
defense just isn't as good. It still can stop the run, it can still get up there and do that, but the secondary just can't stop the pass. And so we've seen a lot of these really explosive spots and
And if
explosive
Kyle
fantasy spots.
Hamilton doesn't play, like
Yeah, it's going to be a tough spot for them. And like you had this in the worksheet, the Ravens games average 57.1 combined points. That's the most in the league. Ravens game average 808.1 combined yards. That's the most in the league. This is not the Ravens and Steelers that we think of because of kind of what's going on with the Ravens offense, but also I think more importantly with their secondary and with that pass defense.
and the Steelers in general, like if you look at what the Steelers have done this season and the list of opponents they've played, if you go down the list, I mean, they have faced some of the worst offenses in the NFL. They faced a competent offense last week and played well. Their defense played well against Washington, and they gave up 27 points. So, like, there's definitely that game had 55 total points in it. And so like this game can definitely get there. I think what is it sitting at? I think it's like currently 48. It opened at what 46 and a half, and it's been bet up.
Yeah.
I definitely am excited for this game and to feature points because I said you're removing two key defenders from this game in Kyle Hamilton and Alex Highsmith. Like I said, we've seen the Steelers give up points to competent offenses this year when they've played them, which has been very few. So, I mean, I'm excited. I think it's a wheels up game. It's a great DFS game. You should be excited to play guys in this game if you've got them.
I do want to mention you kind of hit on the Ravens pass catchers, and obviously we have the Deontay Johnson narrative street, right? And that's kind of where we are. And you talked
Mhm.
about in the worksheet that one of the big improvement areas for Lamar this year has been throwing in those intermediate areas, and that's a place where you would expect Deontay Johnson to win. Unfortunately, he's not playing and he's not running routes. And even though Harbaugh said that they expect him to get him more involved, getting him more involved would be getting rid of Nelson Aguilar, which I think that's fine, but also getting rid of Rashad Bateman, who's kind of been playing well this year. Like Rashad Bateman's never going to probably be the receiver that a lot of us draft nerds hoped that he would be whenever we got really excited about him, but he's been playing fine. And then obviously you have Zay Flowers, who last week it was disappointing that in that game that it still didn't, it didn't really hit for him. But obviously Zay's been, amazing this year.
Yeah, I mean Bateman already has a career high in receiving yards. He's really come on like the past month too. I mean he's got two wide receiver one scoring weeks, over that span. He's been a wide receiver 3 or better in another 2 games over his past 8. So like he's playable, and it didn't work out for Noah Brown last week in the box score. But the reasons we wanted to play Noah Brown is that targets get pushed to wide receiver 2s against the Steelers, and it happened. He had more targets than Terry McLaurin last week. Like you throw opportunity at the wall. Sometimes it doesn't work out. So I do think Bateman is going to have a chance to draw targets in this game. I think he's a really great DFS stacking partner in this game, given his price too this week, because you can hit big plays with them. And then we talk about like that corollary where like we're seeing a lot of wide receiver 2 games happen against wide receivers like a targets, Jalen Tolbert, Josh Downs, Josh Reynolds, Darius Slayton, all out targeted like really good wide receivers, Neighbors and Cortland Sutton, but Cortland Sutton's legit now. Now Bo Nix is back, and then and CeeDee Lamb. So I like Bateman a lot. I think if you're gonna Deontay Johnson, you kind of hit on it. Like his increase in snaps are going to come at the expense of Nelson Aguilar at this point. And Aguilar ran a route on over 50% of the dropbacks last week. If you can get Deontay Johnson up to 50% of the dropbacks, is that going to make him a viable fantasy play? Probably not. But does it make the Ravens better? Probably. And it makes Lamar Jackson better.
We'll never. Nelson Aguilar has had such a good career, and again, it's probably not what we expected for him coming out of college. But he's had a long, solid NFL career, and he will always be
Catching
remembered for that
babies.
Eagles fan. He will
Catching
always be
babies.
remembered. It's just sad. You've had a. I feel bad for you, Nelson Aguilar. You've had a great career. I hope you continue. I hope you continue to get them checks. Um, Talking about the Steelers receivers, you talked about Bateman and DFS. You obviously Flowers in there in DFS. We have
Mhm.
Pickens and DFS. You could even use. We'll see about with kind of like Mike Williams. You could even use Calvin Austin in there. You can build a pretty big game stack here with relatively cheaply, especially if you use Russell Wilson, who I think is 5,900 on DraftKings, and Austin and Bateman. There's a lot of interesting things here, but the one I'm most interested in, the one I will feature in a lot of lineups that aren't even stacking this game, is George Pickens. This game
Oh
seems
yeah.
to set up great for George Pickens.
Yeah, it's a real good spot for George Pickens. We've seen Russ, we always knew that when Russ signed there that he, oh, look what he did with Cortland Sutton. Like Pickens is that
Yep.
same archetype of player. Like get him the ball. He's gonna make all those crazy contortion catches like he had in the end zone last week. And he was getting those opportunities with Justin Fields from like a usage stance, but he wasn't getting those like 50-50 balls, right? He was getting a lot of targets and getting a lot of air yards, but necessarily wasn't getting those like chances to just win one-on-one. Hey, F it, George Pickens down there somewhere. And the matchups also have changed. Like the Steelers schedule has gotten, really light here, and that's kind of helped some things too. But I mean, he's definitely, I think he's definitely probably in wide receiver one territory right now, at least for fantasy, because the way the landscape has moved over the course of the season with injuries, and such like that. But I mean, I go back to the tiers, and like I always thought that he was undervalued from just like an upside stance. It's like everyone's going to treat Drake London and Chris Olave and Garrett Wilson this way. It's like this guy's been as good as those players the first 2 years of his career. Like, why isn't he being, considered in that group as well? And we're starting to see that kind of manifest as well. I do think if you're playing the Steelers, you don't have to go wild. If you're playing Russ, you can just stack him with Pickens and let it be that. You don't necessarily have to do doubles. I think if you are doing doubles from a DFS stance, one interesting name on DraftKings, probably not FanDuel, would be Jaylen Warren. You
Yeah.
look at the Ravens, they're 28th in receiving points allowed to running backs. We saw I almost called him Chris Brown. Geez. Chase Brown last Thursday catch, 9 for 53. I don't think this is going to be a game, because that's the other element to this. Since the Steelers have transitioned to Russ, they're 31st in dropback rate. They're passing the ball 9% below expectations, and George Pickens is still doing this. They aren't doing that this week. Like nobody's run on the Ravens, and nobody's been able to run on them. They remind me of the Lions last year. Like you should think about being worse against the run, Baltimore.
Okay. In
Because
my notes, I said new Lions. That's literally the only note. It just says under Najee Harris, it says new Lions.
yeah,
Be worse against the run, please, because you're getting slaughtered in the secondary. So just let Najee Harris run for an extra half yard a game, entice the carry, entice them to do that. Obviously, assuming Najee Harris is healthy, we'll have to see how that kind of goes throughout the week. But just entice them to run a little bit more and not just throw, uh, as Collinsworth likes to call them, moon balls to to George Pickens, because that's probably a better outcome for the Ravens defense.
and we talked about this all year with the Lions, because they were so good against the run, and their offense was so good at scoring points, like this Ravens team. And they just push teams to throw. They're like, it's crazy. You threw not only just natural game script, but through what is actually works against their defense. And that's why we've seen all this yardage in these games, right? Like all these points, because they're passing scripts. That's what makes
Yeah,
good. So
and that's actually why, to that point, is why I am kind of interested in maybe going on doubles with Russ, especially if you can do it cheap. Like I said with Calvin Austin, because I still, we're going to get more Mike Williams. I would suspect it's still not going to be a ton. He ran 7 routes total last week,
yeah,
but again, just like with the kind of Deontay Johnson, those will be at Nelson Aguilar's expense. I assume that Mike Williams' routes are going to more be in Van Jefferson's expense than it will be Calvin Austin's expense. Calvin Austin also brings those big plays. And so that's kind of why, if I'm trying to look for a double for him, it's not Pat Fryermuth. Like you said,
no.
Jaylen Warren is an interesting one. Mike Williams, I don't think is going to play enough, but if he does play more, that's probably going to eat more into Jefferson. So that's why I'm thinking about Calvin Austin. Calvin Austin's also just cheap. And so if you're searching for a double here, that's kind of the way I would go. But I do think you're right that you don't necessarily have to force that. Russ is not going to get the rushing production that he might have once got, the kind of rushing production that you look to if you're not going to double up a quarterback, if you're going to be using them in DFS. But he could just, like Pickens could just have that big of a game,
And the
enough
reason you
deep
don't
plays
have
that
to
gets
double it is
there.
because it's not an expensive stack already. I mean,
Yeah, that's right.
Russ and Pickens on both sites is just not an expensive stack. So you don't necessarily even have to free up salary with like a cheaper double, like a Calvin Austin or even a Jalen Warren if you're on DraftKings. It's just not you know like I like Bateman more. Like you have more than enough salary to just add Bateman to that stack.
Yeah, and Bateman, I mean, I know he's more expensive. He's not really that much more expensive, I suppose, on DraftKings at least when I was looking at
Yeah.
it. All right, let's move on and talk about the Chiefs at the Bills, another massive game. By the way, remember, if there's a player we didn't hit on in that Steelers and Ravens game you want to know about, head over to Sharp Football Analysis, go to the worksheet. The worksheet is part of our free week. You can sign up, get that worksheet for free, read about every single player available in there. Maybe you're very interested in reading about Pat Fryermuth, even though I just dismissed him. He's in there, so you can read a little bit about Pat Fryermuth. Same thing is also true of this Chiefs at Bills game. Bills, I believe, still -2. I believe the total is still 45 and a half. Yeah, there we are. That is still what we're looking at. So this is an interesting game between two teams that obviously know each other well. I thought it was interesting. You mentioned that, and I believe this is correct. Correct me if I'm wrong. That Josh Allen has played the Chiefs more times in like the last several years than Lamar Jackson has played the Steelers. That's true, right? That's kind of where
It's
we are with
double.
this.
I mean, they've
It's
Josh Allen has played the Chiefs. This will be the 8th time since
yep.
he's been there with against Steve Spagnuolo, and this will be Lamar Jackson's 5th start against the Steelers, which is pretty wild. Being in division.
Yep.
And both those teams being good, but just circumstances of like the Steelers and Ravens have played a couple final games of season, week 17, week 18. So the Ravens have rested guys. And he hasn't played. He obviously had the 2 years where he was banged up, and then he had another year where he missed the Steelers game due to COVID. So like, yeah, this is only Lamar's 5th start against the Steelers in his career, which is kind of crazy to think about.
It's just a wild, absolutely wild. But the other side of that with Josh Allen is we know a lot about what he's going to do against this defense. And I think that one of the more interesting aspects of this that you wrote about in the worksheet, actually, just if you're watching us on YouTube, just kind of scrolled past it, is Allen's kind of usage as a runner in these matchups.
Yeah, Spags has dialed back the blitzes against Josh Allen. Last year, they blitzed them at the lowest rate that they have when these teams have linked up. But I do wonder if just Spags is going to be able to help himself looking at the Bills roster that could be coming, out of the tunnel on Sunday. Because if they're not going to have Dalton Kincaid, we know they're not going to have Keon Coleman. What if they don't have Amari Cooper too? Like, who scares you? Like, if you're Spags, like, who are you getting beat by? You're not scared of the ghost of Curtis Samuel. You're not scared of Matt Collins beating you. You've got Khalil Shakir, who's been a really good player in this
First of
matchup
all,
as
how
well.
dare you?
I know
First of all, how dare you about Matt Collins?
but is a defensive coordinator, you're not. So like, is he going to say like, man, like I am going to be bringing heat? Like, so I'm really curious to see that. Josh Allen has one of the more wilder notes too this season. He hasn't thrown a touchdown against zone coverage yet this season. He's the only quarterback that started every week that doesn't have a touchdown pass against. He should have had one last week to Dalton Kincaid, and not only add insult to injury, we did add injury to insult, I guess, for Dalton Kincaid on that errant throw. But we even because I wrote the note about Gus Bradley's last week. I was like, he's not going to see any man coverage in this game. And they like we didn't. He had 3 dropbacks against man coverage last week and didn't throw a touchdown. So I'm really curious to see what Spags and the Chiefs do here and what they decide to bring out. But Josh Allen has run double-digit times in each of the past 5 times these teams have played, 7 or more times in every time that he's faced the Spagnuolo defense. I do think it's going to be a Josh Allen running game. We saw without the receivers last week, he ran more against the Colts too. So. But you look at last year, too, even in this matchup, I mean, he only threw for 5.5 yards per pass attempt. He got there via the rushing, but he was more of like a back-end QB1. I think in general in this game, outside of Travis Kelce, this is more of like a good real-life football game we're excited about, and outside of having like fantasy ceiling implications for players. I think this game is going to feature better defense like it did last year in both meetings between these teams. And the one difference between this matchup versus the 2 of last year is Joe Brady's not going to be able to line up and just run the football on this Chiefs team. like they did in both matchups last year. I mean, this Chiefs defense has been absolutely incredible against the run this year. These are not the old school Chiefs. They'll give up production to running backs. I mean, they are number one in success rate against running back runs. They have allowed the fewest yards per carry to running back runs. And these are not running backs that are dogs. Like they have faced Derrick Henry. They have faced, Alvin Kamara. They have faced they faced the 49ers and Jordan Mason. Like the most yards a running back has against them is 58 yards in a game this year. So I'm real curious to see like how Joe Brady, calibrates, especially if they're not going to have these wide receivers, and generates enough offense against this Chiefs team. And this Chiefs team has been like the same thing all year for us from an offensive stance. They kind of just meander their way through games. You had the tweet, I think, during the game. You're like, how are the Chiefs going to pull their way out of this one? And guess what? They blocked the field goal and got their way out of it. But outside of Travis Kelce,
all well, nevertheless, they managed to wriggle their way out of it. Who would have guessed that they'd be able to do it?
But from a fantasy game, like Travis Kelce is the only guy like I'm like really like still excited about. I mean, he's just getting so many targets. I mean, he has double-digit targets in 3 straight games. He's got a great history in this matchup too. Bills fans have definitely felt the wrath of Travis Kelce in this rivalry.
Yeah, no, he's really set up for a good spot. I do want to mention about Josh Allen, by the way. That's a nice little preview for what you might find in some of the prop recommendations for this free week. You might go look at some Josh Allen rushing lines. Before we get off the Bills, I do want to, first of all, Khalil Shakir has only caught 80.8% of his targets over the last 3 games, which is absolute trash. Khalil Shakir, how dare you not count 100%? But like, I think we kind of glossed over a little bit Dawson Knox here. If you're fishing for this
just because
game,
I don't want to speculate.
If you're fishing for this game and if Dalton Kincaid is out, this is definitely a Dawson Knox spot. Kansas City's given up 9.3 yards per target, tight ends this season, 3rd worst in the league. Will Knox get targets? Will he draw the targets? That's been a problem throughout his career, even before Kincaid showed up. We'll see. But there's a Dawson Knox box. I do want to get on to
He'll end up being Travis Kelce. Immensely popular DFS play if Kincaid's ruled out.
Absolutely. He is going to be on a ton of rosters. I'm even a lot more thinking about if you really need like a tight end streamer. It's not the best situation in the tight end streaming streets this week. So like there you go. But I mean, if Kincaid's out, you should have some Knox. If you're making 20 fantasy DFS lineups, you should definitely have some Knox in there.
I mean, there are some. The guys on bye. I mean, people have been playing Cade Otton and people have been playing Trey McBride, obviously, and those guys are on bye.
Yeah, no, there's definitely a need here for someone like Knox to be streamable. Will Dissly, by the way, also streamable. We'll get to him in just a second. I do want to mention, you kind of talked about you're not very excited from a fantasy perspective for a lot of this matchup, and I understand, but it is important to point out that we have had a Patrick Mahomes fantasy renaissance, as I'm choosing to say it in the most pretentious way possible, over the last 2 weeks.
Well, I mean, kind of. We obviously had the spot against the Bucks that was good, and he was the QB12 last week. But in the context of basically every other week this season, that wouldn't have been a QB1 performance game, and it was QB12. It was like right on the line. He only averaged 6.3 yards per pass with 1 touchdown in the game, and he had 19 rushing yards. So I mean, I still am not elevating Patrick Mahomes, especially against this Bills defense that's been good all year. They've only allowed 1 QB1 score this season, and that was in that just bloodbath against the Ravens to Lamar Jackson. But we talked about another example when Lamar Jackson's faced good defenses. It's still gone pretty well for him. But yeah, I'm still not willing to just like say Mahomes is back. Like I still want to pick our spots with them, and I don't know if this is a clear-cut one. I think this is more of like a borderline QB1 situation.
Yeah, we might get. I haven't officially seen word on if we're getting Matt Milano back this week. But he did return to practice, so that would be another kind of aspect here. And the other part about this, before we move on to talk about the Bengals and Chargers, it's just, I guess, smoke them while you got them with Kareem Hunt.
Yep,
because
one more week, baby.
As I have said, I've been saying for a month now when asked about Kareem Hunt, there's an expiration date on this, and it's coming, and it might be coming at the right time, because what did he average, like 2.5 yards per carry last week? So we might be there at the right time for the Chiefs to get back Isaiah Pacheco. All right, let's finish up here with the Bengals at the Chargers on Sunday night. Chargers -1.5, 47.5 point total on that one. So with the Bengals at the Chargers, first of all, we do a lot of DFS talk here. Obviously, that's not on the DraftKings slate; it is on the FanDuel slate.
Mm-hmm.
So there's interesting there. And this is a game. When I saw the we were talking yesterday about kind of what we might be interested in. And when we were talking about it yesterday, the total was 46.5. It's already been bet up. That still seems low to me. This feels like a game that could be a lot more high scoring than maybe it seems, even with that relatively high total, just thanks to the fact that we have no idea how good this Chargers defense is. And if you look at the Chargers defense and kind of the scoring in their games, you go, okay, you know, it hasn't been very good, but they've played the Raiders, the Panthers, the Steelers with Justin Fields, the Chiefs, the Broncos, the Cardinals, the Saints with Spencer Rattler, the Browns, and the Titans. We have no idea what this Chargers defense is. We have no idea how good it is, and Joe Burrow's just been unbelievable in fuego recently. I think this is a game where the Bengals are going to push the Chargers to have to throw. The Chargers have been willing to throw. Justin Herbert has been good, and I'm really excited from a fantasy perspective about this game and kind of what we're going to see on Sunday night.
Yeah, because even if the Chargers are still a good defense, and there is some truth to where all their defensive metrics lie, even against good opponents, we'll finally get some of that revealed. We know the Bengals, anytime they've played a competent offense, have given up a bunch of points. They've allowed 24 more points to everyone except for the Patriots, the Giants, and the Browns. Every other team that they've played have scored 24 more points than them, and that includes the Panthers and the Raiders. We're going to get some points in this game for sure, at least from the Charger side. And if we get T. Higgins, I believe we're still going to get it from the Bengals side too. I mean, Burrow's thrown a bunch of touchdowns the past 2 weeks, and Jamar Chase at the nuclear game, but people, I think, have forgot how good his splits were when the sample where we had T. Higgins on the field as well, where his completion rate went up 8% and his yards per pass attempt almost went up 2 full yards per pass attempt. Because 2 weeks ago he threw a bunch of touchdowns against the Raiders, but he threw for 6.5 yards per pass attempt again. If you played Chase Brown at DFS that week, which a lot of people did, we should have had 3 Chase Brown touchdowns that game against the Raiders. Burrow's out here doing his Brett Favre impersonation, throwing 2-yard touchdown passes. Give those to the running back, especially when we play them. But yeah, this is by far the biggest test. The Chargers have faced one QB1 scorer this season, and it was Kyler Murray. They did give up a QB1 scoring week to him. It did come on the strength of that rushing touchdown, but that's why Kyler is in QB1 range anyways. He's had 2 good passing performances. This is by far the best quarterback that they've seen. And the other side, Herbert is on fire too. I mean, you look at Herbert the past 4 weeks, he's 3rd in the NFL in yards per pass attempt, and he looks healthier. He obviously started the season with that toe injury. Then he picked up an ankle injury early in the season, and he scrambled at the highest rate in his career last week. They ran a designed QB run for a touchdown to start off that game. He's run in 2 of the past 3 games, and the Bengals have allowed 29 or more rushing yards to 8 of the 10 quarterbacks they faced. So this is a spot too, I think, where Herbert is not only a good streamer. You hit on this game's on the FanDuel slate. Herbert is 7,300 on FanDuel. He is 100% in play there. If you're trying to get to the high price CMC and fit Devin Achane into lineups this week, Herbert definitely is a guy who can get you there.
I mean, you mentioned him as a runner. That's another. If we're thinking about props this week, that's another thing to be kind of on your mind. The Chargers did. I've been mentioning, like a broken record. We've seen since the bye, the Chargers pass rate over expected be a lot different than what we thought it would be heading into the season. That backed off last week, but I think that the matchup certainly played a role. And like you said, they're going to get pushed here. With the Bengals receivers, if T. Higgins is back, we're excited about that. It'll just be T. Higgins, Jamar Chase, sleep well, Mike Gesicki. I do think that the backfield is interesting because Chase Brown has obviously had this backfield completely to himself, 100% of the backfield touches, I believe 2 weeks in a row now. But they did make that trade for Khalil Herbert. Chase Brown has had a couple kind of untimely fumbles. I am going to be interested. I still think this is Chase Brown's backfield. I don't think we're going to get Khalil Herbert coming in here and taking it over. But I am interested to see kind of how much of Chase Brown do we continue to see, especially if he continues to kind of make those kinds of mistakes. So that's certainly something to watch here.
Yeah, just keep an eye on it, but I do think that he's played well enough outside of, the hiccups. These types of things always comes down to the coaching staff, right? Because, it's kind of, fumbles are largely fluky. They don't happen as much as coaches really believe they happen per touch. It's just the timing of the 2 he's had. And remember the first time that he fumbled earlier in the season against the Giants where it went out of bounds, they gave him the ball the next play and he had a 30-yard touchdown run. So they've already shown us that they will go back to him a little bit. You just don't want him to leave the door open and kind of blow his shot because he's been so good. He's not going to get 100% of the backfield touches the rest of the season, just like no running back does. So he's going to, shed some of that work. But you definitely are excited with the situation that's kind of played out this far with Chase Brown. I definitely think he can be a RB1 type, if he continues to just hold on. We're just waiting for more clarity, right? And see where it falls with Khalil Herbert. But I definitely am excited for him. And I think that we all, even with T. Higgins coming back, I think we're going to see Jermaine Burton kind of rotate in with Voss as well. I don't think that Jermaine Burton experiment, I don't think is going to get closed because T. Higgins coming back. I think that they just generally weren't getting enough out of Voss to warrant him getting the snap share that he was prior to the T. Higgins injury anyways. I think we were always trending towards seeing more Jermaine Burton the back half of the season. You just need him to start showing up to these meetings.
So that's the thing, is like, this is one of those great examples of something weird happened and it kind of changed our perspective on it. If he doesn't miss that meeting, then he gets a lot of snaps. And that's pretty clear that that's why they were so mad. It's one of the reasons Joe Murray was so mad, is that
Yeah.
he had a big role in that game and it's just, missed a meeting and wasn't there. And then apparently went and played slots that night, which I don't know. I don't know if that's
Another questionable decision here.
I don't know if that's a great look, Mr. Burton. So maybe think about that. But then he comes right back from that and is involved last week, right? And so we're seeing that happen, which earlier in the season, even when Higgins was out, he wasn't involved at all. And so we've seen that growth. And I think you're right. As much as I want it to work out for Joseph, we haven't seen him produce enough efficiency to kind of stay there. The problem is that what does it mean for fantasy for Burton? Well, next to
No,
nothing if
right,
Higgins is
nothing.
healthy. Like, it's just going to be Chase and Higgins. We've seen that play already, and so that's kind of the problem. But I think it's a fair point. And then to the Chargers receiving core, I mean, if the Chargers are getting pushed, I think you obviously feel a lot better about Ladd McConkey. If we can get those a lot more attempts, I think you feel good about that. And then, I mean, I guess the other side of the question is, are we believing in Quentin Johnston? Are we finally here? Is it time? This is a Quentin Johnson explosion. Like, are we, by explosion, I mean catching two passes and one of them happens to be a touchdown. Are we finally here with Quentin Johnston?
I thought about doing Quentin Johnson for the Uncut Gem, but I thought he was too good. But I think I'm excited about Quentin Johnson. This is spot I'm excited for him,
Yeah.
for sure, because you're obviously still excited for Ladd McConkey. He's a guy that can get open against man coverage. He's a guy that can earn targets, and he's done that. But we have seen him these past 4 weeks earn a lot fewer targets than he had. Like, he's only been targeted on 17.6% of his routes his past 4 games, with a high mark of just under 22%. As when you look at week 1 through 6, he didn't go under a 25% target per route rate in any of those games. And we've seen Quentin Johnston come back and like an emergence of Will Dissly. But the Bengals have been really good against slot receivers all year. They're second in the NFL in points allowed per game to slot receivers. Where they've been really bad is on the outside and giving up a lot of production to outside wide receivers. So I do think if we're going to get a lot more volume, you can kind of say, like, Quentin Johnston's been giving us these splash plays. Is there some stability here? Because from a routes run perspective, he's the guy that's out there. I mean, last week he was on the field for 96% of the dropbacks, his highest rate in a game this season. So he's going to be on the field that much in a game they're getting pushed. I don't want to overlook him and just say it's Ladd McConkey, because the matchup could be kind of a signal for Quentin Johnston. And we definitely have a matchup signal for Will Dissly, because the Bengals have been absolutely crushed by tight ends this entire season. I mean, they're 25th in catch rate to tight ends, 23rd in yards per target, 29th in touchdown rate. Dissly has had a lower route participation rate with Hayden Hurst coming back, but he's still getting targeted a lot when he's on the field. So he's in play too as a streamer or FanDuel, cheap play too, to get you to pieces. If you're on FanDuel and you're up at 4 p.m. when the 4 p.m. games end, the late slate, and you have no player minutes remaining, you're gonna be in some trouble in this game, I think.
Yeah, I got lucky. I had that exact situation on FanDuel going into this last Sunday, and I got lucky on that one. This week, I'm definitely gonna have some players in there. You mentioned Will Dissly. Will Dissly was almost my Uncut Jim. I didn't end up doing it, but to everything else that you added there, Hayden Hurst is back and he's still running the routes. That's what we want to see out of Will Dissly. So yeah, wheels up on him as a streaming option. We didn't get to the backfield usage. I want to encourage people to go to Sharp Football Analysis, look at this worksheet. Remember that the worksheet preview for this game and every game this week is available for free as part of our free week. Head over to Sharp Football Analysis. sign up for free week, get access to this, because reading about the Chargers backfield usage is important this week with Gus Edwards back and kind of some of the changes that we've seen. So go and check that out. Another thing about free week, Derek asked in the chat, can I throw out a fantasy start sit question? The best place to do that is on Sunday mornings as part of our subscriber only chat with Rich Hribar, 11:45 a.m. Eastern every single Sunday morning. You'll get a link emailed to you on Sunday morning that'll give you access to that subscriber only chat. Again, that'll be part of free week as well. Sign up for free week and you'll get access to that. Make sure you do that. All right, let's move on to Uncut Gems. Both of us have given out some names that we almost picked, which means that those names will definitely do better than anybody that
Oh
we
yeah,
say here. There's no question that Will Dissly and
we're
Quentin
gonna
Johnson are
curse
going to
these
do better
guys.
than the names. We've cursed these two. So who's yours? Who's the guy that you're cursing with our Uncut Gems?
Yeah, I'm going with Kayshon Boutte this
There
week.
we go. We're going real uncut now. That's what I like to hear.
Yeah, and for a couple of reasons here. Well, one is the usage for Kayshon Boutte has
Yeah.
been way up. He's run a route on 86% or more of the dropbacks in 4 straight games. The past 2 games, he's been on the field for 100% of the dropbacks. He has over 20% of the targets in 2 of those 3 games, 26% last week. But in particular, this matchup I think does set up well because you always know with the Patriots, there's a lot of volatility with any of their pass catchers week to week. If you started Hunter Henry last week, you found that out too. But the Los Angeles Rams are excellent against slot receivers this season. They've only 30% of the receptions they've allowed to wide receivers have come from the slot this season. That's the lowest rate in the NFL. And they've also only allowed a 50% catch rate per target to slot receivers, which is the lowest rate in the NFL. So typically, the safest Patriot is always Demario Douglas, but the matchup is not very favorable for him this week. They've been absolutely awful against boundary receivers this year, a league high 10.7 yards per target. So I'm going with the man, Kayshon Boutte, this week. Am I going to get to him in DFS? I don't think it's necessary this week, but maybe you do and you free something up. But I think if you're in these deeper flex leagues or something, he's definitely worth a look this week.
I'm glad you went extra deep on this. And first of all, on your Demario Douglas thing, his route participation rate last week was back down to 62.1% off the top of my head, but I think it's somewhere around that. And so Demario Douglas isn't on the field as much as
Yeah,
Boutte
being that
is,
slot
or
receiver is tough when you're winning games.
exactly, or as whoever the number 2 receiver is, because they seem to change it every single week who's playing in that number 2 spot. But Kayshon Boutte's been on the field a lot, and so that's call. I'm glad you went a little bit deeper because I didn't. I'm just going to go with Russell
Fair enough.
Wilson, who I was surprised to see him above my threshold in the waiver column. I was looking forward to recommending him as a streamer, and he was just above my threshold on ESPN leagues, which was a bit surprising to me. But he was someone that I think you definitely could have thought of as a streamer last week as well. But I
Mm-hmm.
mean, it's just pretty straightforward. He pushes the ball downfield. He should do that more in this situation as the Ravens push them to throw. The Ravens secondary is vulnerable, especially down the field. He's throwing it up to George Pickens, who we expect to have a big game. Like, I'm not going to make this terribly complicated. This is a game we're targeting. Russ, has been playing well enough, and we definitely can have one of those games where he just connects deep for 3 targets with George Pickens. A couple of them happen to be touchdowns, and we end up getting there that way. So, I mean, it's not complicated. I'm not going to belabor it, but yeah, I think we're set up for us to have a good game. If you've listened to this podcast to this point, I think you know that we're excited about the Steelers Ravens game from a fantasy perspective. So I suppose it should not be a surprise. Any other maybes? Like, I guess if we're throwing out maybes and Will Dissly and Quentin Johnson, you had any off the top of your head that were maybes that you thought about?
No, I was kind of, I thought about Calvin Austin for a minute and I thought
Yeah,
I'd throw him out there, but I just felt a lot more confident just from a playing time
yeah,
perspective
absolutely.
about Kayshon Boutte and throwing him out there. But no, yeah, Will Dissly, I knew we were going to talk about the Chargers game and we would get there. So I was kind of just throwing a real deep dart here.
This is not somebody that you should be playing this week you shouldn't even have this player. But I want to tell you that I have apparently my thing this year is going to just be weird fixations on Saints wide receivers. Remember, it was Mason Tipton for a couple weeks. We're in on Kevin Austin now. He probably won't even get promoted this week. But do you remember the combine? Do you remember Kevin Austin coming out of Notre Dame and the combine destroyed the combine?
Yeah,
Like
he was, yeah, a demon.
6'2", 200 pounds, 4'3", 40. And then he played 50%, ran a route on 50% of the dropbacks last week. So just keep that name in the back of your head. If you were chasing, we didn't even talk about real or fake with Marquez Valdes-Scantling. I didn't
We
even
don't
think
need
we
to.
needed to.
We
We
don't need
didn't
to.
need to do that. One of the biggest waiver wire traps I've seen this year, but maybe not. I don't know. Maybe he's just going to catch all 3 of his targets every week for 109 yards and 2 touchdowns. Who knows? We'll see. We'll see. if that happens, I'm sure we'll talk about it next week here on this podcast, this episode of the podcast. Again, every single Thursday, 11:30 a.m. Eastern. I say every single Thursday. In 2 weeks, it'll be Thanksgiving. I can't imagine we do it then. But most Thursdays, we're here at 11:30 a.m. Eastern on YouTube. Head over to YouTube, search Sharp Football Analysis, click on the notification, click on the subscribe. You'll get notified when we go live, notified when Warren goes live on Fridays and Tuesdays, when I go live with Tucker on Mondays. A lot of stuff happening there. If you're listening to this as a podcast, we really appreciate that. Thank you for supporting us there. And remember, this is free week. Access to all of this, every single game we talked about, and then every other game, Rich's worksheet previews, those are available as part of free week. Sign up, sharp.football. You can sign up for our free week. You also get all of Warren's betting recommendations, a ton of stuff. Sign up for it. There's no reason not to. You get access to all of this great content. See what we do here every single week. We really appreciate the support, and we'll be back to talk with you next week.